marry me." The words came from a man she had never spoken to, a man the entire city feared. Isabella Carter stood in the middle of her own engagement party, still holding the broken champagne glass she had dropped when she walked in on her fiancé kissing her younger sister. Her dress was still perfect. Her makeup was still flawless. But her entire life had just been destroyed in front of every person she had ever trusted. And now, Matteo Russo, the most dangerous man in Chicago, was standing in front of her, waiting for her answer. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop the name of your city in the comments below, and stay with me until the very end. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Isabella Carter had spent 34 years being exactly what everyone needed her to be: the responsible daughter, the patient fiancée, the woman who smiled through every difficult moment and never once asked for anything in return. She had learned early that love in her family came with conditions. Her mother praised her when she was graceful. Her father approved of her when she was quiet. And Adrian, charming, handsome, perfectly polished Adrian Whitmore, had chosen her because she was, in his own words, the kind of woman a man could build a future with. She had believed him. She had believed all of them. And tonight, the night of their official engagement announcement, the night 500 guests had gathered at the Langham Hotel ballroom to celebrate the union of the Carter and Whitmore families. Isabella finally understood what all of it had actually meant. She was useful. She was convenient. She was the perfect centerpiece for a life other people had designed. She was never the one they actually wanted. The evening had started beautifully. Her dress was ivory and structured, the kind of gown that whispered elegance without demanding attention. Her dark hair was swept back. The diamond on her finger was exactly the one Adrian had insisted on, classic, flawless, chosen to impress his business partners, rather than because he had ever once asked her what she liked. She had smiled anyway. She always smiled anyway. The ballroom was filled with the kind of people who moved the city. Politicians, old money families, business executives who traded favors over expensive scotch and never said what they actually meant. Her father stood near the front, proud, in the way that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with what this marriage would mean for Carter Industries. Her mother floated between tables, accepting compliments that really belonged to the event planner. Isabella moved through it all with practiced ease. She shook hands. She laughed at the right moments. She stood beside Adrian when the photographer came and let him pull her close like she was something he owned. She was good at this. She had been good at it her entire life. "You look incredible," her best friend Dana had whispered earlier, squeezing her arm. "Are you happy? Tell me honestly." Isabella had paused for just a fraction of a second. "Of course I am," she said. Dana had looked at her a moment too long. But she hadn't pushed. Nobody ever pushed with Isabella. She always seemed so perfectly composed that people assumed there was nothing underneath to find. It was 40 minutes into the reception when she first noticed that Adrian was gone. He had stepped away from the main room to take a call. At least that was what he said. She had nodded, told him to take his time, and continued speaking with the Whitmore's attorney, who had been explaining something about the merger paperwork that would run parallel to the wedding contracts. She tried to care about what he was saying. She tried to feel excited about her own engagement party. But there was something strange sitting at the edge of her attention. Something she couldn't name. A kind of quiet wrongness, like a note that was almost in tune, but not quite close enough that no one else would notice, but impossible to ignore once you heard it. She excused herself politely. She walked through the side corridor that led to the private event offices. She told herself she was only going to find Adrian. She told herself she was not following a feeling she wasn't ready to name. She told herself a lot of things in the 30 seconds before she opened the wrong door. She heard Victoria's laugh first. Low, soft. The kind of laugh her sister only used when she wanted something. Isabella stopped moving. Her hand was still on the door handle. The door was open 2 inches. That was enough. Through the gap, she could see her younger sister, 28 years old. Always the beautiful one. Always the dramatic one. Always the one their mother worried about, and their father excused, standing against the wall with her hands in Adrian's hair. And Adrian, her fiancé, the man whose ring was on her finger, His hands were on Victoria's waist. His jacket was halfway off his shoulders. And the way he was looking at her sister, the way he was actually looking at her, was a way Isabella suddenly realized he had never once looked at her. Not once. In 4 years of being together. Not once. Isabella did not scream. She did not cry. She pushed the door open fully, and the sound of it hitting the wall was enough. Adrian spun around. Victoria gasped and stepped back, pulling her dress straight, as if that somehow changed what Isabella had already seen. For 3 full seconds, nobody spoke. Isabella stood in the doorway holding the champagne flute she had been carrying, and looked at both of them with a clarity so complete it almost felt like calm. "Isabella," Adrian started. "Don't." Her voice was quiet. That was the thing that surprised her most. She expected to shatter. Instead, she felt absolutely terrifyingly still. "Don't say anything yet." She looked at her sister. Victoria had the grace to look ashamed at least for a moment. Her eyes were wet. Her lip was trembling. She opened her mouth. "Bella, I'm so sorry, it just—" "Don't call me that." Isabella took 1 step forward. "Don't call me Bella. Don't apologize. And don't explain anything to me right now. Because if you say one more word, I will walk back out into that ballroom and tell every single person in there exactly what I just found." Victoria snapped her mouth shut. Adrian straightened. She could see him calculating, already reaching for the right words, the right angle, the right way to manage this. That was what he did. That was what he had always done. She just hadn't been paying close enough attention. "It's not what you think," he said. "It's exactly what I think." Isabella tilted her head slightly. "You were kissing my sister. At our engagement party. In a room down the hall from our families. That's exactly what I think. We should talk about this privately." "We're private right now, Adrian. It doesn't get more private than this." She looked at the glass in her hand. She was surprised to notice her hands weren't shaking. "How long?" He said nothing. "How long?" she asked again, and this time there was something in her voice that cut. Victoria looked at the floor. 8 months, Adrian finally said. The number landed like a physical blow. 8 months. That was before the engagement. That was before the ring. That was before the dinner with both their families, when he had asked her father for permission and her mother had cried happy tears. And Isabella had really believed that she was finally standing in a moment that was truly hers. 8 months. "So when you proposed to me," Isabella said slowly, "you were all ready." "It's complicated," Adrian said. "Stop saying that." Her voice didn't rise. If anything, it dropped. "It's not complicated. You wanted me for what I came with. The family. The name. The way I looked standing next to you at events like this one." She glanced toward the door, toward the sound of the ballroom, toward 500 people who still didn't know. "And you wanted her for something else." Victoria flinched. "Bella, please." I said don't. Isabella turned to her sister and looked at her for a long moment. This was the person she had shared a childhood with. The person she had defended when their parents argued. The person she had lied for and covered for and protected, because that was what older sisters did. "I'm sorry," Victoria whispered. "No, you're not." Isabella set the champagne flute down on the nearby table very carefully, like she was afraid of what she might do if she held it any longer. "You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry I opened that door. But you're not sorry it happened." She turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" Adrian asked sharply. "Away from you." She said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. "You can't just walk out of your own engagement party." She stopped. She turned back around. And she looked at Adrian Whitmore. Really looked at him for possibly the first time in 4 years. "Watch me," she said. She walked back into the ballroom. She did not stop to speak to her parents. She did not explain herself to the guests who turned to look when she crossed the room without Adrian at her side. She picked up her clutch from the table where she had left it, and she kept walking. Her mother appeared at her elbow. "Isabella, where is Adrian? People are asking when the toast is." "There won't be a toast tonight, Mother." "What are you talking about? The photographer is ready and your father wants—" "There won't be a toast." She kept moving. Isabella. Her mother's voice dropped to a sharp whisper. This is not the time for drama. Whatever small argument you're having, you can resolve it after the party. Isabella stopped walking. She turned and looked at her mother, a woman who had spent 40 years mastering the art of making problems invisible, and said very quietly, "It's not a small argument, and I am not having drama. I am leaving." Her mother's face went pale. "If you walk out of here, what will people think?" "I don't know," Isabella said. "But for the first time in my life, I genuinely don't care." She walked out. The night air hit her the moment she stepped onto the hotel steps, and she breathed it in, like someone surfacing from water. She didn't know how long she stood there. Long enough for the valet to ask twice if she needed her car. Long enough for the city noise to replace the party noise in her head. Long enough to realize that the thing she felt was not grief. Not yet. Right now, it was something stranger. Something that felt almost like relief. She pressed one hand over her mouth, not to hold back a sob, but to hold back a laugh. Because wasn't that the most awful thing? That standing here, having just lost her engagement, and her sister, and the future. Everyone had planned for her. Some part of her felt like she could finally breathe. What did that say about the life she had almost locked herself into? What did that say about how she had been living? She dropped her hand. She straightened her spine. And she was standing exactly like that, composed and still and quietly devastated when she heard the voice. "You handled that with more grace than most people would." She turned. A man she did not know was standing at the base of the hotel steps, his hands folded in front of him, watching her with calm dark eyes that gave away nothing at all. He was tall. His suit was black and expensive and perfectly cut, and he wore it the way men wore armor, like it was designed to create distance. He had the kind of face that was difficult to read and impossible to forget. Not handsome in the easy, obvious way. Adrian was handsome. Something older and harder and far more serious than that. "I don't know you," Isabella said. "No," he agreed. "But I know who you are, Isabella Carter." She studied him. "And who are you?" "Matteo Russo." The name hit her differently than any name had hit her in years. Even she, who had spent most of her life deliberately staying away from the rougher edges of Chicago's power, knew that name. Everyone knew that name. The Russo family did not operate in the same world as the Carters or the Whitmores. They didn't sit on charity boards or attend fundraising galas. They didn't need to. Their power was older and darker, and far less interested in being seen. Matteo Russo was the eldest son of that family. He had been running it, really running it, not just inheriting a title, for nearly a decade. The stories attached to his name were the kind that people repeated very carefully and never to the wrong ears. He was 38 years old. He had never been married. He had never needed to explain himself to anyone. And he was standing on the steps of the Langham Hotel, looking at her like she was a puzzle he had already mostly solved. "What do you want?" Isabella asked. "To make you an offer." He tilted his head slightly. "If you're interested." "An offer." She repeated the words back slowly. "My engagement just ended. My sister just betrayed me. And you want to make me an offer?" "Yes." "That's a very interesting time to approach someone." "It's the right time," he said simply. She should have walked away. Every rational part of her knew that. She was standing in the wreckage of the worst night of her life, speaking to the most dangerous man in the city, and not a single person inside that ballroom knew where she was. But she didn't walk away, because the alternative was going back inside. Going back to her mother's sharp whispers about what people would think. Going back to the sound of Adrian's voice explaining why what she had seen wasn't really what it was. Going back to being the woman who managed every crisis quietly and accepted every betrayal gracefully and asked for nothing. She had spent 34 years doing that. "What kind of offer?" she asked. Matteo Russo looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes, and he said two words that changed the direction of everything. "Marry me." Isabella stared at him. "I don't know you," she said again. "You said that already." "Because it's relevant." She crossed her arms. "Men who are strangers don't propose to women on hotel steps. Men who are strangers don't usually have the reasons I have. And what reasons are those? I was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, she realized, but deciding exactly how much to say. It was a particular kind of calculation, controlled and deliberate. She had seen men calculate before. Adrian calculated all the time behind his easy smile. But this was different. This felt honest in a way that was almost uncomfortable. My family is in a war, Matteo said. Internal. My brother has moved against me. I need a public alliance, a marriage that sends a message about where I stand and who stands beside me. And you chose me. You're the daughter of one of the most connected business families in Chicago. The engagement is public knowledge. Everyone just watched you walk out of your own celebration. He paused. You're someone people already know. Someone whose strength they just witnessed, whether they understood it or not. I walked out of a party, she said flatly. You walked out of a life, he corrected quietly. There's a difference. And most people in that ballroom felt it even if they don't know why yet. Isabella was silent. She looked out at the city, at the lights and the noise and the distance between here and everything she had thought her future would look like, and she thought about the sound of her sister's laugh. She thought about Adrian's hands. She thought about her mother's face asking what people would think. This would be a business arrangement, she said carefully. Completely. Not real. What is real, Matteo said, is the protection I can offer you while you decide what you actually want your life to look like. What is real is the alliance it creates. What is real is that it stops everyone in that room tonight from spending the next 5 years treating you like a cautionary tale. That landed somewhere she hadn't expected. She looked at him. You would get an alliance, a public statement, political cover in whatever battle you're fighting with your family. She ticked it off methodically. What would I get? Freedom, he said. To rebuild, to move differently, to stop being managed by people who needed you weak. Something shifted in her chest. She hated how well he understood it. She hated how much sense it made. If I say yes, she said, I need conditions, written, clear, and I need them respected. He nodded once. Name them. My own space, my own decisions. You don't control me. I'm not interested in controlling you. No public appearances without my agreement in advance. Reasonable. And if I ever decide to leave, you leave, he said simply. Clean. No consequences. She searched his face for the lie in that. She had become very good at finding lies. She had just not been looking in the right places for the last 4 years. She didn't find one. You're a dangerous man, she said. Yes. And you're asking me to walk into the most dangerous situation of my life on the worst night of my life. I'm asking you to walk into a situation that is honest, he said, which is more than the people inside that building were offering you. Isabella looked back at the hotel. Through the tall windows, she could see the blur of the party, the lights, the movement, the shapes of people who had gathered to celebrate a future that no longer existed. Her mother was probably managing the room already. Her father was probably deciding on a statement. And Adrian. Adrian was probably straightening his jacket and preparing his explanation. She looked at Matteo Russo. She thought about what she would be walking toward, and what she would be walking away from. And then Isabella Carter, who had spent 34 years being exactly what everyone needed her to be, made the first decision of her life that belonged entirely to herself. Yes, she said. Matteo nodded once, like she had confirmed something he already knew. There's a car waiting, he said. I need to get my things from inside. No, you don't. He held her gaze. Everything you actually need, you already have it with you. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she walked down the hotel steps and didn't look back. Behind her, the party continued. 500 people who still didn't know the story had already changed. Her mother was somewhere near the entrance, watching for her return. Adrian was composing himself. Victoria was crying in a private room, rehearsing the version of tonight she would eventually tell. None of it mattered anymore. A black car was waiting at the curb. A man opened the door. She got in. Matteo sat across from her, quiet and still. And as the car pulled into Chicago traffic, and the hotel disappeared behind them. Isabella realized something that she would turn over in her mind for weeks afterward. She was terrified. But for the first time in 4 years, every single cell of that fear belonged to a choice she had actually made. Not a role she had been handed. Not a life someone else had written for her. Hers. She stared out the window at the city moving past, and she let herself feel all of it. The fear, the devastation, the grief, the strange wild pulse of something she couldn't name yet, but that felt dangerously remarkably close to hope. And somewhere across the car, Matteo Russo watched the city the same way she did, like a man who had learned long ago that the only safe thing in this world was knowing exactly who you were. She wondered if she was about to learn the same lesson. She wondered if she was strong enough. She thought about the way Adrian had looked at her sister. And she decided quietly, completely, with the particular kind of certainty that only comes after everything breaks, that she was. The car ride lasted 40 minutes. Neither of them spoke much. Matteo made 2 phone calls, short-clipped in a language she didn't recognize, and she stared out the window at Chicago, passing in the dark, still wearing her engagement party dress, still wearing the ring that no longer meant anything. At some point, she slid it off her finger. She held it for a moment. Then she set it on the seat beside her without a word. Matteo glanced at it. He said nothing. But something in his expression shifted, something small and almost imperceptible, like a man quietly revising an opinion he had already formed. The car stopped in front of a building on the north side. Not flashy, not the kind of place that announced itself. Just a clean, serious building that radiated the particular stillness of somewhere nothing got in without permission. Inside, 2 men were waiting in the lobby. They nodded at Matteo and looked at Isabella with the careful blankness of people trained not to react. She walked in like she owned herself. That was the only thing she knew how to do right now, so she did it completely. A woman met them in the elevator, mid-40s, sharp eyes, dark suit, carrying a tablet. She introduced herself as Elena, Matteo's chief of staff, and she looked at Isabella the way a person looks at a variable they haven't yet decided is a problem. "Your room is prepared," Elena said. "There are clothes, toiletries. Anything else you need tonight, you tell me." "I'm fine," Isabella said. Elena looked at Matteo. He gave a single nod. She stepped out at the next floor without another word. When they reached the top floor, Matteo led her down a hallway and opened a door. She stepped inside. It was a large, clean room, her own space separate from his, which he pointed out immediately. "My suite is at the other end of the hall," he said from the doorway. "This floor is yours. No one enters without your permission." She turned and looked at him. "You planned for this." "I plan for most things." "Did you plan for tonight specifically, or just in general?" He considered the question. "I've been watching the Carter-Whitmore alliance for 6 weeks. I knew it was unstable. I didn't know the specific way it would collapse." "So you were at the party hoping something would go wrong?" "I was at the party because 2 of my business connections were guests." He paused. "What happened with your fiancé and your sister, I won't pretend I'm sorry it happened. But I wasn't counting on it." She absorbed that. It was an honest answer. An uncomfortable one. She respected it more than she would have respected reassurance. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we talk about what comes next." He pulled the door closed. She stood in the middle of the room, alone in her engagement dress in a stranger's building, and she let out a breath that seemed to carry the entire weight of the last several hours. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed, and she finally let herself cry. Not the quiet, managed tears she had learned to produce at appropriate moments, but the real kind. The kind that came from somewhere deeper than emotion. The kind that sounded ugly and felt worse and didn't stop for a long time. She cried for the 4 years she had given to a man who was using her. She cried for her sister and for the particular grief of a betrayal that comes from someone who is supposed to love you. She cried for her mother's voice, asking what people would think, as if the entire point of Isabella's life was to manage other people's perceptions of it. And when she was finished, she washed her face, changed into the clothes that had been left folded on a chair, and sat by the window, looking out at Chicago, until the sky started to go pale. She did not sleep. But by the time morning came, she had made peace with something she couldn't have named yet. A quiet decision that had no words attached. The kind that lives in the bones rather than the mind. She was not going back. Whatever this was, whatever came next, she was facing it forward. The next morning changed everything. Matteo was already at the table when she walked into the common space at 7. Coffee was made. Documents were laid out. He was reading something with a focused stillness that reminded her strangely of her own habits, the way she used to review Carter Industries reports before anyone else in the family was awake. He looked up. "You didn't sleep." "No. Coffee is there. I can see that." She sat down across from him and poured herself a cup, and something about the ordinary domesticity of the gesture felt bizarre enough that she almost laughed. "You wanted to talk about what comes next?" "Yes." He pushed a single sheet across the table toward her. "The terms, written as you asked." She picked it up and read it carefully, the entire thing top to bottom twice. He waited without speaking, which she appreciated more than she expected. Men who watched women read with obvious impatience had always told her exactly who they were. The terms were clean, straightforward. Her autonomy was explicit. The exit clause was real. There was a financial arrangement, a settlement in her name, separate from his deposited immediately that she had not asked for, but that she understood. It was the kind of thing that made a contract credible. It gave her power inside the agreement, instead of just the promise of it. She set the page down. "There's one thing missing," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "I need to know who I'm actually marrying." She folded her hands on the table. "Not the reputation, not the name. I need to understand your family. The war you mentioned, the brother, all of it. Because if I'm walking into your world, I need to see it clearly." Matteo leaned back. He studied her for a moment, the way he seemed to study most things, with the kind of patience that didn't feel passive. It felt like a decision being made in real time. "Lorenzo," he said finally. "My younger brother. He runs the Eastern distribution network for the family. For the last 18 months he's been rerouting money, small amounts at first, then larger. Then he started having conversations with people he had no business talking to. Rival families, rival organizations, some local, some not." His voice was level. No drama in it, just facts stated cleanly. "He wants control of the family. He believes I've held it too long and too tightly. He's not entirely wrong about the second part." She hadn't expected that. "You're admitting he has a point." "I'm saying I understand his logic. That's different from agreeing with what he's doing." Matteo looked at his coffee. "Lorenzo is smart. He's also reckless. The combination is dangerous." "What does the marriage do?" Isabella asked. "Concretely, in this war you're describing." "It demonstrates stability, publicly. The Russo name attached to the Carter name that sends a message to everyone watching that I am not isolated, that I have alliances, that moving against me costs more than Lorenzo has calculated." He met her eyes. "It also moves the timeline. Lorenzo is planning something. I need him to move before he's ready, and a public marriage announcement does that." She processed this. "You're using the announcement to flush him out." "Yes." "That's quite a thing to use a marriage for." "I told you from the beginning what it was." "You did," she agreed. She looked at the contract on the table. "I need a pen." He produced one from his jacket pocket and set it in front of her without a word. She signed her name on the line, put the pen down, slid the page back across the table, and Isabella Carter, who 48 hours ago had been planning a wedding with a man who didn't love her, became the future wife of the most dangerous man in Chicago. The wedding was 12 days later. Not small, but not enormous. Intentional. Every guest was on a list that Matteo and Elena had constructed together, and Isabella had reviewed it with the same systematic attention she had once applied to Carter Industries' quarterly reports. She knew what the event was supposed to accomplish. She treated it accordingly. She wore a dress she chose herself. Deep ivory structured. Nothing like the original wedding she had been planning. Elena had offered to arrange everything. Isabella had said politely and clearly that she would handle her own appearance. Elena had blinked exactly once and then said, "Of course." The ceremony was private. The announcement was not. By the time the small gathering was over, the news had moved through Chicago's interconnected social and business worlds, the way fires moved through dry grass. Isabella Carter had married Matteo Russo. Her phone, which she had left largely untouched since the engagement party, filled up in 2 hours. Her mother called 6 times before leaving a voicemail that was more composed than Isabella expected. "I don't understand what you've done. Call me when you're ready to explain it." Her father sent a single text. "Is this real?" She replied. "Yes." He didn't respond again. Dana, her best friend. The only person who had looked at her that night and asked if she was actually happy, sent 3 consecutive messages in rapid succession. Isabella Rose Carter. "You did not. Call me immediately. I am losing my mind." She smiled at that one. Really smiled for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Adrian sent nothing. Victoria sent nothing. The silence from both of them told her everything she needed to know about where they actually stood. Her first week inside the Russo household was a study in learning to read a completely different language, not a literal one. Though she picked up quickly that Matteo and most of his staff switched between English and Italian depending on the sensitivity of what was being discussed. The language she was learning was structural. The way power actually moved in this world. Who deferred to whom? Who made eye contact and who looked away? Whose opinions changed the room and whose didn't register? She was good at this. She had been studying power dynamics her entire life. She had just been doing it from inside a much more polished cage. Elena watched her. Not unkindly exactly, but with the unblinking attention of someone assessing a threat level. On the 4th day, Isabella stopped in the doorway of the office Elena used and said directly, "I'm not here to take your job or undermine your role. I understand what I am in this arrangement, and I have no interest in creating problems where none exist." Elena looked at her for a long moment. "Good," she said, "because I've worked for this family for 11 years, and I protect what matters." "I know," Isabella said. "I'm counting on that." Something shifted between them after that. Not warmth, not yet, but respect, the kind that gets built in the moment. 2 people stop performing and start being honest. She met the rest of the inner circle gradually. Marco, who ran security and had the energy of a man who had seen too much and slept too little. Gianni, the family's attorney, who was old enough to have worked with Matteo's father, and who looked at Isabella with an expression she eventually identified as cautious optimism. Renata, the housekeeper, who had been with the family for 20 years, and who showed Isabella exactly where everything was kept, with the particular efficiency of someone who knew that the woman of the house would be more stable if she understood the household. None of them were what she expected. None of them were simple. And Matteo was the most complicated of all. She learned him in pieces. He worked long hours. She knew this because she also worked long hours, and they kept crossing paths in the kitchen at 11 p.m., and then midnight, and then closer to 1. He didn't seem surprised by this. She didn't explain herself. It became, after the first week, a strange and oddly comfortable routine, 2 people moving around each other in the quiet of the night, both too honest to pretend they were sleeping. The second week, he asked what she was working on. She looked up from her laptop. "What? You've been on that computer every night for a week. What are you working on?" She hesitated. Not because she didn't trust him exactly, but because she hadn't had anyone ask her that question. That genuine, simple, "What are you actually working on?" question in longer than she could remember. "I've been going through Carter Industries' public filings," she said, "for the last 5 years." He came and sat down across from her. "Why?" "Because I need to understand what my family actually built and what was built on lies." She turned the laptop slightly so he could see the screen if he wanted. "My father has always said the company is solid, but there are patterns in these numbers that don't make sense unless there are private arrangements I wasn't told about." Matteo looked at the screen. He was quiet for a moment. "What kind of patterns?" he asked. And that was the conversation that lasted until 3 in the morning. The first real one. They had the kind where neither of them was performing or managing or calculating. Just 2 people, both suspicious by nature and trained by life, looking at the same information and pulling at the same threads. He knew things she didn't. She saw things he hadn't looked for. By the time the conversation wound down, she had 3 new lines of inquiry and a completely different picture of what might be happening inside her family's finances. "You're good at this," Matteo said at one point. She looked up. "At what?" "Pattern recognition. You see what's missing, not just what's there." She considered that. "My father always said it was my most useful quality. He meant it as a compliment. I'm not sure it was." "It's the most useful quality for the world you're in now." She held his gaze for a moment. "Is that why you chose me, not just for the family name?" He was quiet long enough that she knew the answer before he gave it. "Partly," he said. "What else? You walked out of that party without hesitating. Most people in your position would have gone back inside." "I almost did," she said. "But you didn't." She looked down at her laptop. "No, I didn't." 3 weeks into the marriage, the first real test arrived. She was in her office. She had converted one of the spare rooms, and Elena had watched this happen with an expression that never quite resolved into approval or disapproval when Marco knocked on the door with a particular quality to his knock that she had already learned meant urgency. "There's a situation," he said. She stood up immediately. "What kind?" "Lorenzo Russo made a public statement this morning. He called the marriage a publicity stunt and said Matteo has lost the respect of the family. He gave it to 2 newspapers and a business magazine simultaneously." She felt something cold run through her chest. Not fear exactly. Something sharper than that. "Where's Matteo?" "In the main office. He's not in a good state." She walked to the main office. She knocked once and went in without waiting. Matteo was standing at the window with his back to her. He didn't turn when she entered. His shoulders carried a particular kind of tension that she had learned to read. Not anger, but something older and harder. The specific weight of a betrayal that comes from someone you were supposed to be able to trust. She knew that weight very well. "Lorenzo gave a statement," she said. "I know." "Have you read it?" "I don't need to read it." "Read it." She walked to the desk, pulled up the article on his laptop, and turned it toward him. "Read exactly what he said, because what's in there is not just an attack on the marriage. It's a message to every family that works with you. He's telling them you're weak, and the response matters more than the attack." Matteo finally turned and looked at her. His expression was controlled, almost too controlled the way things get when someone has been managing themselves for a very long time. He walked to the desk. He read. She watched his face as he did. Watched the precise moment when he got to the line she had already identified as the critical one. Lorenzo's quote that Matteo had always chosen power over people, and that the marriage proved he was willing to use anyone to hold on to a position he no longer deserved. The muscle in his jaw tightened. "He's trying to provoke you," she said quietly. "He wants you to react publicly, loudly. He wants you to prove his point." "I'm aware." "So what's the response?" Matteo looked at her. "You're asking me?" "I'm asking you what you want the response to be," she said. "Because I have thoughts, but this is your family and your reputation, and I won't step into the middle of it without knowing where you stand." He was silent for a moment. It occurred to Isabella, watching him, that this was probably not something that happened to Matteo Russo very often, someone asking him what he actually wanted before acting. People in his world moved when he decided and moved away when he said so. They didn't stand across from him and ask him where he stood. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. It sounded like it cost him something to say it. "The response should be visible, but not emotional," she said. "Something public that demonstrates normalcy and confidence, not a counterstatement. Those always look defensive. Something that shows you're not rattled. Lorenzo's narrative is that you're desperate. The answer to that is not argument, it's evidence." "Evidence of what?" She met his eyes. "That you're not alone. That this marriage is real enough that we can stand in the same room in public and make people believe it." He studied her. "You are suggesting we appear together." "I'm suggesting we attend the Mitchell Foundation dinner on Friday. I know 3 board members personally. We walk in together. We speak to people we actually know. We don't make a statement. We don't need to." She paused. "The appearance is the statement." He was quiet for a long moment. "You've been in this world 3 weeks," he said. "I've been navigating powerful families my entire life," she said. "The names are different. The rules are the same." Something in his expression shifted. Again that small, almost imperceptible revision. Like he was recalculating something he thought he had already figured out. "Friday," he said. "Friday." The Mitchell Foundation dinner was a masterclass in controlled narrative. Isabella wore dark green. She stood at Mateo's side and spoke to people naturally warmly, specifically the way she had been trained since childhood to make people feel seen. But this time, it wasn't performance. This time, she was actually paying attention, actually listening, filing away every micro-expression and shift in body language, like information she would need later. Because she was beginning to understand that in this world, information was the same thing as safety. 3 separate people pulled her aside during the evening quietly away from their husbands or wives or business partners and said some variation of the same thing. "You surprised everyone." She smiled each time. She said the same thing each time. "I've spent my whole life being underestimated. I've decided to stop apologizing for exceeding expectations." By the end of the night, Mateo's phone had received 4 messages from family allies that Elena later summarized as favorable. In the car going home, he said, "You were different tonight." "Different from what?" "From how I expected you to handle it." She looked at him. "How did you expect me to handle it?" "Carefully," he said. "Quietly. Staying close to me." "I'm not a decoration," she said. Not sharply. Just clearly. "No," he agreed. "You're not." He said it with a directness that caught her off guard. No qualification, no hesitation. Just a flat acknowledgement of something he had apparently decided was true. She turned to look out the window because she needed a moment to process the strange, warm, uncomfortable feeling that had just moved through her chest. This was not supposed to feel like anything. This was supposed to be a deal. She looked at the city lights and told herself very firmly to be careful. 2 days after the dinner, Dana met her for coffee. Isabella had asked. She needed something ordinary, something that reminded her she was still a person outside the world she had stepped into. Dana arrived looking like a woman who had approximately 40 things to say and was visibly restraining herself to 5. She lasted 40 seconds. "Okay," Dana said, wrapping both hands around her mug. "I need you to talk to me because I have read everything that has been printed about you in the last 3 weeks, and I understand nothing. What do you want to know? Are you safe?" Isabella looked at her. "Yes." "Are you sure?" "Dana." "I'm serious, Bella. You married a man who I mean the things people say about him." "People said a lot of things about me too," Isabella said quietly. "After the party. I've heard some of them." Dana's face did something complicated. "That's not the same." "No, it's not," she agreed. "But it tells me something about how quickly people decide they understand a situation they know nothing about." She wrapped her hands around her own mug. "I know what I walked into. I know exactly what it is and what it isn't. And I've never felt more like myself than I do right now." Dana studied her. A long, searching look that had been a feature of their friendship for 15 years. The one that meant she was deciding whether to believe what she was hearing or push harder. "He treats you well?" she asked finally. Isabella thought about the kitchen at midnight. The conversation about Carter Industries that lasted until 3 a.m. The way he had said, "You're not a decoration," with quiet, absolute certainty. "He treats me like I'm capable," she said, which is more than most people have ever bothered to do. Dana was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said slowly. "Okay. I'm watching, though." "I'd expect nothing less." That night, Isabella was cross-referencing financial documents when she found the first real thread. A subsidiary company, 3 layers removed from Carter Industries, had made substantial payments to an LLC she didn't recognize. The LLC had been registered 18 months ago. The registration address traced to a law firm she knew. Adrian Whitmore's family law firm. She sat very still for a moment. Then she pulled up the full network of subsidiaries and started mapping backward, following the money with the methodical precision of someone who had spent years learning to see what wasn't meant to be seen. The picture that emerged took 2 hours to build, and when she saw it completely, when she understood what she was actually looking at, her hands went still on the keyboard. The connection between Adrian's finances and her family's finances was not new. It was not a recent development. It was years old, and it ran through her sister's name. Her engagement to Adrian had not been arranged by love or even by strategy. It had been the surface layer of a financial architecture that several someones had spent years constructing. She had not been betrayed. She had been managed. Her entire relationship with Adrian had been a moving piece in someone else's plan. She picked up her phone and called Matteo. He answered on the second ring. "Come to my office," she said. "Now." A beat of silence. "What did you find?" "Something that changes everything," she said. "About both our families." He was there in 4 minutes. He stood in the doorway of her office and looked at the financial map she had built across 2 screens, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. Then he pulled a chair around to her side of the desk and sat down next to her, not across from her, beside her, shoulder to shoulder, studying the same information she was studying, and she felt the shift that produced. Not romantic. Not that. Something different, and in some ways more significant. The shift of two people who had started this as a transaction and found themselves, without planning it, becoming something that operated more like a team. "Walk me through it," he said. She did. He listened without interrupting, which was rarer than it should have been in her experience. He asked 3 questions, all sharp, all targeted, at exactly the parts of the structure she was least certain about. When she finished, the room was quiet. "If this is accurate," Matteo said carefully, "then Adrian Whitmore was not acting alone." "No," she said. "And whoever built this knew both our families well enough to create leverage in multiple directions." "Yes." He looked at the screen. His expression was the particular kind of controlled that she now understood meant he was very, very angry, which for Matteo Russo looked nothing like how most people looked angry. It looked like absolute stillness. "Lorenzo," he said. The name sat in the air between them. "I don't have proof yet," she said carefully. "But the timeline matches, the contacts match, and the LLC was registered 9 months before I started noticing anything wrong in Adrian's behavior." She looked at the screen. "Someone introduced them. Someone who had access to information about both families. Someone who needed the Carter-Whitmore alliance to exist so that it could be used." Matteo sat back. "He set this up," he said. Not a question. "Someone did." She met his eyes. "And they've been watching us since before we got in that car." The silence stretched. Outside, the city moved and breathed and went on being itself completely indifferent to the two people sitting inside this room, looking at a map of a betrayal that had been running longer than either of them knew, and somewhere across Chicago. Lorenzo Russo was watching the marriage. He had underestimated watching it become something that was starting to look a great deal more dangerous than a publicity stunt. He had made one mistake. He had built his plan around an Isabella Carter who no longer existed. The woman sitting beside Matteo Russo in the quiet of a midnight office, eyes sharp, voice, steady hands already moving toward the next document, was someone he had never accounted for, and that was going to cost him everything. The financial map stayed on Isabella's screens for 3 days. She didn't take it down. She added to it carefully, methodically, the way she had always approached problems that were bigger than they initially appeared. Every new thread she pulled produced 2 more. Every name she confirmed generated a cluster of adjacent names she hadn't expected. The architecture of what Lorenzo had built was not simple. It was patient, layered. The work of someone who had been thinking about this for a very long time. Matteo reviewed everything she found. He came to her office every evening and sat beside her, that same configuration, shoulder to shoulder, both of them facing the same information, and they worked through it together without either of them acknowledging that this had become their rhythm. Elena noticed. Isabella could tell by the way the woman's expression had shifted from careful assessment to something more nuanced over the past week. Not quite acceptance. More like the specific recalibration of someone who had been prepared for one thing and received another entirely. On the fourth morning, Isabella found the name she had been looking for. She sat very still for a moment staring at the screen. Then she picked up her phone and sent Matteo a single message. "I found the bridge. Come now." He was there in 3 minutes. She turned the screen toward him without preamble. "This man, Felix Carano. He's listed as a silent partner in the LLC we traced to Adrian's law firm. But look at the board registration date. 9 months before the LLC was formed, he was listed as an independent contractor for the Russo Eastern Distribution Network." Matteo went very still. "Lorenzo's division," she said. "Yes. He moved from your brother's payroll to Adrian Whitmore's financial network. He's the bridge. He's how they communicated without using any communication that could be traced directly between them." She leaned forward. "And he's still active. He filed paperwork last week." Matteo looked at the screen, and his jaw tightened in that precise, controlled way that she had learned meant something was being decided internally that would not be visible until it was already in motion. "You're sure?" he said. "I've checked it 4 different ways." He nodded once, slowly. "If we move on Carano," he said carefully, "Lorenzo will know we're close. He'll accelerate whatever he's planning." "If we don't move," Isabella said, "Carano keeps feeding him information, including everything we're currently doing." The room was quiet. She watched Matteo process it, the weight of a decision that had no clean option, only 2 different kinds of risk. She had seen men make decisions like this before. Her father made them in boardrooms with the windows shut. Adrian made them while smiling at something else. Matteo made them with his eyes open, looking directly at the cost, not away from it. "We move on Carano," he said. "But carefully. Marco handles it." "There's something else," she said. He looked at her. "Before we do anything with Carano, I need to speak to my sister." She called Victoria herself. Not because she wanted to, because she needed information that only Victoria could give her, and because the particular kind of conversation she needed to have required her to be the one who initiated it. She could not send someone else. She could not use email. She needed to see her sister's face when she asked the questions she had been building toward for weeks. Victoria picked up on the 4th ring. Her voice was careful, braced. "Bella." "Don't call me that," Isabella said. Same as that night. Same tone. Quiet and absolute. "I need to meet with you, in person, today." "I don't think that's—" "It's not a social call, Victoria. I have information about what you were part of. The full picture, not just you and Adrian." A pause. "You need to decide if you want to hear it from me first or find out about it some other way." Silence. "What time?" Victoria said. They met at a cafe on the west side neutral territory, nowhere near the Carter family home, nowhere near anyone who would recognize either of them and report back to their mother before the conversation was finished. Victoria arrived looking like someone who had not slept well in weeks, which was fair. Isabella hadn't either, but where insomnia had sharpened Isabella into something precise and focused, it had worn her sister down into something fragile and frightened. Good, some cold part of Isabella thought, and then immediately felt ashamed of it. She sat down across from her sister and looked at her directly. No warm greeting, no softening of the distance between them. "Tell me what you actually knew," Isabella said. Victoria wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Isabella kept her voice steady. "I have the financial architecture. I know about the LLC. I know about Felix Carano. I know that whatever was between you and Adrian wasn't just an affair." She paused. "So I need to know, how much of it did you understand? How much did you agree to?" Victoria's face shifted through 3 different expressions, in quick succession: denial, calculation. Then, something that landed closer to real. "I didn't know all of it," she said. "I didn't know about the money. Adrian told me—" She stopped, swallowed. "He told me it was about the merger, that our family and his family needed a tighter connection to make a deal work, and that you were going to be fine either way, that you would inherit the company regardless." "He told you I would be fine," Isabella repeated. "Yes. After he ended the engagement and married someone else." Victoria looked at her hands. "He made it sound like you didn't actually love him either." He said you two had grown apart, that it was mutual. And you believed that. I wanted to believe it, Victoria said, and that at least was honest. Her voice cracked on it. Because I was already... She stopped again, pressed her lips together. I was already in it by the time I realized what kind of man he was. Isabella watched her sister's face. She had grown up reading this face that tells that Victoria had never been able to fully control the way her eyes moved when she was keeping something back. There's more, Isabella said. Victoria looked up. What else did Adrian tell you? About why the alliance between our families mattered. About who else was involved. Victoria's hands tightened around the cup. He mentioned someone, a partner, someone who had approached him first before he even started the deal with Dad. He called him a silent partner. She hesitated. He never said a name. But you have a guess. The pause was long enough to be an answer by itself. He got a call once, Victoria said slowly. When I was in the other room. He thought I couldn't hear. The person on the other end, Adrian, called him Lorenzo. The name dropped into the space between them like a stone into still water. Isabella absorbed it without letting her expression change. Thank you, she said. She stood up. Bella Isabella. Victoria reached across the table and caught her wrist. Her grip was tight, desperate. Is it dangerous? Whatever you found, are you in danger? Isabella looked at her sister's hand on her wrist. She thought about 4 years of a relationship she was only now understanding had been engineered by someone who had used both of them as instruments. She thought about what it meant to have been played so thoroughly that even the betrayal had been choreographed. I'm handling it, she said. I'm sorry, Victoria said. And this time, finally, it sounded like she meant something deeper than the surface version. I was selfish and I was stupid, and I was exactly what someone needed me to be. I'm sorry. Isabella looked at her for a long moment. I know, she said. She walked out. And she didn't let herself feel it, not yet. She had work to do first. She told Matteo about Lorenzo's name the moment she was back. He sat with it quietly for almost a full minute, which was longer than his silences usually ran. She let him have it. Some things required time to move through the body before the mind could make decisions. Lorenzo introduced himself to Whitmore, Matteo said finally. He approached him. Used the Carter-Whitmore engagement as a vehicle to build leverage against me. He needed the engagement to exist, Isabella said. Because if it fell apart on its own terms, if it collapsed naturally, it created a vacuum. A disruption in your ally network. Something he could exploit. So he controlled the collapse. He timed it, she said. He accelerated it. He probably told Adrian that Victoria was a safer long-term investment than I was, which given what he needed from Adrian was probably even true. Matteo looked at her with something that was hard to categorize. He used your sister against you, he said. He used everyone. She met his eyes. That's the thing. He didn't hate any of us particularly. We were all just instruments. Victoria, me, Adrian, even you, especially you. You're not the target of his hatred. You're the obstacle to what he wants. That's not comfort, Matteo said. It's not meant to be. It's information. She leaned forward. Because the difference matters. Someone who hates you is unpredictable. Someone who only wants what you have, they follow logic. And if they follow logic, they can be predicted. And if they can be predicted, they can be moved, Matteo finished. Yes. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and she watched the tension in his shoulders and thought about all the ways this particular betrayal was different from the one she had survived. She had lost a fiancé and a sister. He had lost a brother. Not to death. Worse, to the cold, deliberate decision to use love as a weapon. When we were growing up, Matteo said without turning around. Lorenzo was the one who made people laugh. He was brilliant at it. He could charm anyone in a room in under 5 minutes. My father used to say Lorenzo had the gift and I had the instinct. That between us, we were a complete person. She said nothing. She waited. I trusted that, he said. For a long time after I should have stopped. I made accommodations I shouldn't have made. I looked away from things I should have looked at. He turned around. His face was still controlled, but there was something behind it that was not. My silence about his behavior wasn't strength, it was sentiment, and he used it. You loved your brother, she said. Yes. That's not a weakness. In this world, in any world, she said. It's not a weakness. Someone choosing to exploit it, that's their crime, not yours. He looked at her. She met his eyes without flinching. And the air between them shifted again, a little more of the transaction falling away, a little more of something else taking its place. Marco's team found Felix Carano on a Thursday. He was brought in quietly. No noise, no drama. That was how Marco operated, and Isabella had come to understand that Marco's quietness was a kind of professionalism, the absence of theater, that actually meant business. She was not in the room when they spoke to Carano. She had not asked to be. But Matteo told her afterward, sitting in the kitchen at the late hour, that had become their default for the conversations that mattered. He gave us Lorenzo's timeline, Matteo said. He's been moving money for 8 months. He has enough now to fund a direct move against 3 of our primary alliances. He's planning to make that move within the next 2 weeks. Isabella calculated quickly. The Ricci family dinner is in 10 days. Yes. That's where he plans to do it. Almost certainly. She looked at her coffee. He'll try to make you look unstable in front of the people who matter most. He'll present himself as the stable alternative. And if he's been laying groundwork for 8 months, he'll have already spoken to some of them privately. I know. Have you talked to the Riccis directly? Not yet. You should, she said. Not me, you. They're old school. They need to hear it from you personally. But you need to go before Lorenzo gets another message to them. She looked up. How much time do we have? 2 days, maybe 3. Then you go tomorrow. She paused. And I think you should take me. He raised an eyebrow. The public narrative Lorenzo is running is that this marriage is a desperation move, she said. The best counter to that narrative is us together in person, speaking to people who knew you before any of this started. If they see that I'm real, that I'm capable, it closes the door on his argument. She held his gaze. Unless you have a reason not to. He considered it for a moment. No, he said. No reason. The meeting with the Ricci family was not what she expected. She had prepared for formality. For the particular kind of old-world masculine authority that required women to perform a specific kind of graceful invisibility. She had done it 1,000 times in Chicago's business world, and she knew exactly how to manage it, not by disappearing, but by being so naturally quietly competent that people absorbed her presence without consciously deciding to. What she found was Francesco Ricci, 70 years old, sharp as a man of 40, with 2 daughters who ran his legal operations, and a wife who sat at the head of the table and watched everything with the patient attention of someone who had been reading people for decades. Carla Ricci spoke to Isabella before the formal meeting started. Just 10 minutes in a separate room while their husbands did the preliminary conversation. You're not what I expected, Carla said. I hear that frequently, Isabella said. My husband liked Matteo's father very much. He has complicated feelings about Matteo. She folded her hands on the table. Tell me honestly, are you afraid of him? No, Isabella said. Good answer or true answer? True answer. She met the older woman's eyes. I was afraid of losing myself before him. I was afraid of the life I was building with someone who didn't see me. What I am with Matteo is not afraid. That's the most honest thing I can tell you. Carla studied her for a long moment. Lorenzo came to see my husband 3 weeks ago, she said. Isabella felt the information land and kept her face absolutely neutral. I see. He said Matteo was losing control, that the marriage was a performance, that the family would be better served by new leadership. She paused. My husband didn't commit to anything, but he listened. Of course he did, Isabella said. Lorenzo is persuasive. He's had years of practice. What do you want me to tell my husband? Isabella looked at this woman, this sharp, careful, deeply practical woman who had clearly been navigating power beside a powerful man for decades, and made a decision. Tell him the truth, she said. That I'm not performing, that Matteo doesn't need to perform, That Lorenzo has spent 8 months constructing a version of events that positions himself as the solution to a problem he personally created. She paused. And tell him that in 2 weeks, you're going to have a very clear picture of who is actually in control of this family. And you want to be on the right side of that line before it becomes obvious. Carla was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled just slightly. The smile of a woman who recognized directness when she encountered it. "I'll tell him," she said. The drive back from the Ricci meeting was when it happened. They were 40 minutes from home. Matteo was quiet beside her. Not the tense quiet of before, but the settled quiet of someone who had just handled something difficult and was still inside it. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression changed completely. Not by much, a fraction of tension at the corners of his eyes, a stillness through his jaw. But she had been watching his face for 6 weeks and she read it immediately. "Who is it?" she asked. He showed her the screen. "Lorenzo." She felt her heart rate spike. She said nothing. She waited. Matteo answered. He put the call on speaker without her asking, a small thing, but not a small thing. He chose to include her. In that moment, in real time under pressure, he chose not to shut her out. "Brother." Lorenzo's voice was smooth, warm. The kind of warm that cost nothing and meant nothing. "I hear you've been visiting people. That's interesting." "I visit people often," Matteo said. "The Riches specifically, after 8 months of not calling Francesco." A pause. "Someone's been helping you connect dots, Matteo. I wonder who." "You have something to say, Lorenzo. Say it." A short silence. Then pleasantly, "I'm giving you an opportunity. Step back from the Eastern operations. Restructure the family with me in a co-leadership position, and I'll leave the marriage alone. I'll stop, let's say, questioning the circumstances of it publicly." "You're offering me a deal," Matteo said. "I'm offering you a dignified exit from a position that's become untenable. The alternative is a conversation I have scheduled for next week that will make the last few months look comfortable." Another pause. "I think your wife in particular would find it uncomfortable." Isabella felt something cold move through her. She looked at Matteo. His eyes were already on her, checking her, reading her, waiting. She gave him one small nod. He looked back at the windshield. "Lorenzo," he said, "the last time someone tried to use a woman to threaten me, I was 23 years old. I handled it then. I'll handle it now." His voice didn't rise, not even slightly. "Call me again when you're ready to have an honest conversation." He ended the call. The car was silent. "He has something on me," Isabella said. "Not a question. Or he thinks he does." Matteo set the phone face down on the seat. "He's reaching." The Ricci visit rattled him. What could he have? She thought quickly, running back through everything: her family's finances, her connection to Adrian, the engagement. The Carter Industries payments. If he has the same financial map we have, he could frame me as part of the scheme. Make it look like I married you to hide my family's involvement. He could try. "That would damage you," she said. "Publicly. If the narrative becomes that I'm complicit, that you were duped." "Isabella." His voice was quiet. "Stop." She looked at him. "He's trying to make you afraid," Matteo said. "Right now. That call was designed to do exactly this, to make you spiral into every possible version of what he could use, so that you're managing fear instead of strategy." He looked at the road. "Don't give him that." She breathed. How was right? She knew he was right. She had seen this tactic before, the preemptive threat, the thing designed to take up all the mental space before the real move arrived. "What do we have that he doesn't know we have?" she asked. Carano's testimony, the financial timeline, the Ricci connection, which is now solid based on what you said to Carla. And 2 weeks is not enough for him to rebuild what he's lost in the last 24 hours. She thought it through. He moved the timeline up with that call. He's scared. Yes. So what do we do? Matteo was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "We let him be scared," he said, "and we use the time he doesn't have." That night was the night everything changed between them. Not dramatically. Not with a declaration or a moment she could have pointed to clearly afterward. It was quieter than that, and more permanent. She had gone back to her office after dinner. The financial documents were still spread across her screens. She was adding one final layer to the timeline, cross-referencing the dates of Lorenzo's financial movements with dates she pulled from her memory of the engagement with Adrian when she heard the door open. Matteo sat down beside her. Without a word, he set a cup of coffee next to her keyboard. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You don't have to stay," she said. "I'm close to finishing this section." "I know." He settled into the chair. "I'm not staying because you need me to." She absorbed that. She turned back to the screen. They worked in silence for the next hour. Her building the timeline, him reading through Carano's testimony on his own tablet, both of them operating in the same quiet space without friction or performance. At some point she said, "He's going to try to humiliate me publicly before the Ricci dinner." "Yes. I need to be ready for that." "I know. Not ready to manage it." She kept her eyes on the screen. "Ready to use it. If he exposes something, anything about my family or my past with Adrian, I need to be the one who controls how it lands. I need to have already told the story in a way that makes his version irrelevant." Matteo put his tablet down. She felt his attention shift, the particular quality of it when he was not just listening but thinking alongside her. "You want to get ahead of it," he said. "I want to go to the dinner and tell the truth. My version of the truth. Before he tells his." She finally looked at him. "I was used. My engagement was engineered. My family's finances were manipulated by people who needed me complicit without my knowledge. That's not a weakness, that's evidence of how deeply he had to work to get around me." She paused. "But only if I say it first. On my terms." He looked at her for a long moment. "That takes courage," he said. "Or stubbornness," she said. "I've been told they look the same from the outside." Something moved in his eyes. Quiet. Warm. The kind of expression that didn't belong on the face of the man the city feared, and was absolutely there anyway. "You've changed this," he said, "since you walked in that door. The whole shape of it." She didn't look away. "The whole shape of what?" He was quiet for a moment. "Everything," he said, simply, finally, like a man who had decided that honesty was the only thing left worth offering. She felt it move through her, that same dangerous warmth she had been careful with for 6 weeks, the one she had been filing away under the category of not relevant, not safe, not part of the arrangement. She looked at her coffee cup. "We should finish the timeline," she said. "Yes," he agreed. But neither of them moved immediately. And the quiet between them had changed, not the quiet of two people managing a transaction. The quiet of two people who had stopped pretending the transaction was all there was. At 2 in the morning, Isabella found the second breach. She almost missed it. A single transaction buried 4 layers deep, time-stamped 11 days ago. After the wedding. After the marriage was public. Someone inside the Russo organization had sent information to an external account. The transaction was financial coded indirect, but the pattern was unmistakable once you knew what you were looking at. She had been looking at patterns exactly like this for 3 weeks. Someone on the inside was still feeding Lorenzo. Her hand stopped moving. She looked at the timestamp. She looked at the account. She looked at the information that had been transferred. It was a summary of their investigation, the financial map she had been building, the timeline, Carano's name. Someone had given Lorenzo exactly what they were working on, someone who was inside this house. She sat perfectly still for a full minute. Then she reached over and turned off both monitors without saving anything to the shared network. She picked up her phone. She opened a new message to Matteo. "Don't say anything out loud. Don't use the household network. Call me from your personal line. Now." She waited. Her phone rang 30 seconds later. "What's wrong?" His voice was immediately alert. "We have a leak," she said, keeping her voice very low. "Someone inside sent Lorenzo a summary of everything we've found. 11 days ago. Full timeline. Carano's name. The financial map." Silence. "He's known," Matteo said. His voice had gone completely flat. The entire time we've been building toward him, he's known what we have. Yes. Which means the Ricci meeting. He probably already knew we were going before we arrived. She pressed her eyes shut for a sec. The call in the car wasn't a reach. He was telling us he knew. He's been watching us build the case and letting us think we had the advantage. Another silence. Longer this time. Who has access? Matteo said. Not a question. The beginning of a list he was running internally. Everyone on the inner circle has access to the shared system, she said. Elena, Marco, Gianni, the two associates who manage your calendar. She paused. Matteo, 11 days ago. What happened 11 days ago inside this house that was different? She heard him breathe. Gianni came for a meeting, he said slowly. He reviewed the initial findings. He was the first person outside the two of us who saw the full picture. Gianni, the attorney who had worked with Matteo's father. The man who had looked at Isabella with cautious optimism when she first arrived. Old enough to have reasons that predated this marriage by decades. Connected enough to reach Lorenzo without leaving obvious tracks. Loyal enough, she realized now, to have made himself completely invisible as a suspect. Don't let him know we know, she said quickly. Not yet. If he disappears, Lorenzo loses his information source and goes fully defensive. We need him in place long enough to feed him something false. Matteo was quiet. She could feel him processing it, the specific devastation of this particular betrayal. Not a brother this time. A man who had known him since childhood. A man who had sat at his father's table. Matteo, she said. I'm here. I'm sorry, she said. Because she was. Because she understood in her bones from her own experience what it cost to discover that someone's loyalty had always been a performance. We use it, he said. His voice was steady, the steadiness of something decided. We give Gianni something to send, something that looks exactly like our real plan but isn't. Yes, she said. And then we let Lorenzo walk into a room that's set for him. Yes. And we close it behind him. Yes, she said again. And somewhere across the city, Lorenzo Russo sat with his carefully constructed advantage, completely unaware that the woman he had never accounted for had just found the one wire that ran through everything he had built, and she was already deciding where to cut it. They spent the next 48 hours building a lie so precise it looked exactly like the truth. Isabella designed it. That was not something she had expected to discover about herself, that she had a gift for strategic deception, but she understood now that it was simply pattern recognition applied in reverse. Instead of finding what didn't belong, she was constructing something that would feel completely natural to someone who already believed he was ahead. The false information they would feed. Gianni needed to be specific and wrong enough to matter. It needed to confirm what Lorenzo already suspected while redirecting his response toward a moment they controlled. She worked at the kitchen table with Matteo across from her, both of them speaking quietly, both of them aware that the household systems could not be trusted. Marco had been brought in. Matteo had called him personally from the car on a line that ran outside the building, and he stood near the door, now arms folded, listening without expression. Lorenzo expects us to make our move at the Ricci dinner, Isabella said. That's what he's been told. He'll try to preempt it, arrive first, speak to Francesco, privately reframe everything before we get there. So we let him go to the Ricci dinner, Matteo said. We let him go to the Ricci dinner expecting to find us there, and we're not there. She looked at Matteo. We're somewhere else. Somewhere he doesn't know about. Somewhere we've already secured before he realizes the dinner was never the real play. Marco shifted his weight slightly. Where? The Benedetti family, Matteo said. He had been thinking ahead of her, she could see it. Francesco Ricci was always a middle position. The Benedettis are the anchor. If we have them, the Riccis follow. Lorenzo hasn't approached the Benedettis yet, Isabella said. I checked the timeline. He's been saving them. He thinks they're his closing move. Then we take them first, Matteo said, before the dinner, while he's preparing to walk into a room we're not in. She nodded. And we give Gianni the dinner plan, the real-looking version. He sends it. Lorenzo prepares for a confrontation at the Ricci table. She paused. And while Lorenzo is performing for an audience that no longer matters, we're already done. Marco looked at Matteo. The Benedetti meeting that needs to come from you directly. Old man Benedetti doesn't do intermediaries. I know, Matteo said. And he's going to ask about the marriage, Marco added with a directness that came from years of having earned the right. He's going to want to know if it's real. Both men looked at Isabella. She met Marco's eyes. Then he should ask me, she said. Feeding. Gianni, the false information required a performance. Neither of them discussed extensively beforehand. There was no script. Matteo simply called a meeting normal routine, the kind Gianni had attended dozens of times, and walked through the Ricci dinner plan in precise, confident detail. He laid out the approach, the talking points, the specific sequence of conversations that would expose Lorenzo's manipulation in front of the assembled families. Isabella sat at the meeting. She contributed. She added detail that made the plan feel lived in and real, because it was based on the actual work they had done, just redirected toward the wrong conclusion. Gianni took notes. His expression was attentive, professionally engaged, exactly as it always was. She watched him without appearing to watch him, and she felt something cold and sad move through her. He was good at this. He had been doing it for a long time, and he looked exactly like a trustworthy man because he had spent decades making that look effortless. She thought about Matteo's father, who had trusted this man. She thought about Matteo himself, who had grown up with Johnny's presence as a constant, a fixed point in a world that was always in motion. She thought about how betrayal from the oldest loyalties cut the deepest and left the strangest scars. When the meeting ended and Gianni left, Matteo stood at the window for a long time. She didn't push him, she waited. He looked me in the eye, Matteo said finally. Yes. He's been looking me in the eye for 30 years. I know. My father trusted him completely. She crossed the room and stood beside him, not touching, just present. Close enough that he would know she was there. Some people are very patient with their betrayals, she said quietly. It doesn't make them right. It just makes them harder to see. He was silent for another moment. When this is done, he said, I'm going to have to decide what to do with that. Yes, she said, but not tonight. He looked at her. Something in his face that she had never quite seen before, not the controlled competence, not the managed authority. Something more tired than that, more human. I don't know how you're still standing up, he said. Everything you've walked through in the past 2 months, your family, your sister, the finances, and you're still... He shook his head slightly. Still what? Clear, he said. You're still clear-eyed, after everything. She considered that. I think being lied to for a long time makes you very committed to seeing things accurately, she said. It becomes a kind of survival skill. He nodded slowly. I should have done this differently, he said. The marriage, the way I approached you that night. I came to you when you were the most vulnerable you'd ever been in your life, and I offered you a business arrangement. She looked at him. You offered me honesty, she said, when every other person in that building was offering me management and performance. You told me exactly what you wanted and exactly what I would get. She paused. I've had 4 years of someone who never told me the truth. Honest terms felt like a gift. That's a low bar, he said. It was, she agreed. But you've been clearing it consistently ever since. The look on his face was something she chose not to analyze too closely. She walked back to the table and picked up her coffee. We need to finalize the Benedetti approach, she said. What time tomorrow? He was quiet for a moment. 8 in the morning, he said. I'll be ready at 7:30. Old man Benedetti was exactly what she expected, and nothing like she had prepared for. He was 74 years old, and he moved through a room the way certain people did when they had stopped needing to prove anything to anyone, slowly, deliberately, with absolute certainty that whatever he did was the right pace. His house was on the lake. His handshake was brief. His eyes were the sharpest she had encountered in 2 months of moving through this world. He greeted Matteo in Italian. He greeted Isabella in English. I've heard about you, he said. I imagine so, she said. My wife saw the pictures from the Mitchell Foundation dinner. He settled into his chair and studied her. She said you looked like a woman who belonged somewhere. I'm still figuring out where that is, Isabella said honestly. He seemed to appreciate that. Better answer than most. He looked at Matteo. Your brother called me. I know, Matteo said. He made a compelling case. He usually does. Benedetti folded his hands. He said the marriage was a performance, that Isabella Carter was brought in to stabilize a situation that was already beyond stabilizing. He said you've lost the confidence of 3 families in the past 6 months, and you're covering it with a public alliance that won't hold. The room was very quiet. Isabella waited. This was Matteo's moment. 2 of those 3 families have reaffirmed their positions with me in the past 2 weeks, Matteo said. The third is Lorenzo's direct contact and has been for 4 months. He paused. My brother is not wrong that there is a problem with my family. The problem is him, and I can show you why. He placed a folder on the table. Clean. Organized. The financial timeline they had built, the real one, not the version fed to Gianni. Benedetti opened it. He read without speaking. His expression moved through several calibrations that Isabella tracked carefully. When he reached the page with Felix Carano's name and the registration dates, he stopped. He looked up at Matteo. Carano worked your Eastern network, he said. Yes. And Lorenzo introduced him to Whitmore. Yes. Before the engagement. He closed the folder slowly. He was building this before he moved against you openly. He's been building it for 18 months, Matteo said. Possibly longer. The financial movements we can verify go back 18 months. The relationships may be older. Benedetti was quiet for a long time. He looked at Isabella. What do you know about this that he hasn't told me? She held his gaze. My engagement to Adrian Whitmore was not a coincidence. My family's financial connection to Adrian's firm runs through an LLC that Lorenzo's operative registered. My entire relationship, 4 years of it, was a layer in a structure Lorenzo built to create leverage against Matteo. She paused. I didn't know that until 3 weeks ago. I've spent those 3 weeks verifying it completely. You're angry, Benedetti said. Yes, she said. I'm also accurate. Those aren't the same thing, and I know the difference. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Matteo. Your father would have handled this differently, he said. My father would have, Matteo agreed. I'm not my father. No. Something shifted in Benedetti's expression. He handled things alone. You brought someone. He glanced at Isabella. That's different. He stood up. I'll make calls this afternoon, he said, before the Ricci dinner. Matteo stood as well. Thank you. Thank your wife, Benedetti said simply. She's the one who closed it. They were an hour outside the city when Matteo's phone lit up with a message from Marco. He read it. His expression shifted not much, but she saw it immediately. What? She asked. He handed her the phone. The message was 4 words. Gianni sent it. Tonight. She exhaled. Lorenzo got the information. He's preparing for the dinner, Matteo said. He thinks we're going to be there. How long before he realizes we're not? An hour into the event. Maybe less if Francesco tips his hand. Matteo took the phone back. We need to be ready to move the moment he figures it out. Where will he go? She asked. When he realizes the dinner was empty, when he understands we went around him, where does he go? Matteo thought about it. He'll come to the house, he said. He'll want to confront me directly. That's who he is. He doesn't retreat, he escalates. Then we need to be there when he arrives, she said. Not hiding, not defending, already in the room. Yes. And we need Gianni there. Matteo looked at her. If Gianni is in that room, she said carefully, and Lorenzo walks in expecting to find an advantage, and instead finds that we have his informant, his financial records, and the Benedetti position, there's nowhere left to go. He can't perform his way out of it when everything is already exposed. That's a confrontation, Matteo said. Yes, she said. It is. It could go badly. Everything could go badly, she said. But this way we choose the room. We choose the timing. We choose who's present. She met his eyes. We don't let him decide when this ends. We decide. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Marco, he said, picking up his phone. We're coming back now. Get everyone to the house. Tell Gianni there's been a development, and I need him present tonight. Gianni arrived at 9. He walked in with his usual composed efficiency briefcase in hand, expression professionally attentive. He greeted Marco. He greeted Elena. He looked at Isabella with the cautious optimism she now understood was a practiced mask. He sat at this table. Matteo sat across from him. Isabella sat beside Matteo. Marco stood near the door. Gianni looked around the room, and something in his face shifted very slightly, very quickly, but she caught it. The specific micro-adjustment of a person who has just calculated that the room is not what they expected and does not yet know why. "What's the situation?" Gianni asked. His voice was steady. He was good. "The Ricci dinner is happening right now," Matteo said. "Lorenzo is there. He believes we're going to be there as well." "You're not going." "No." Matteo folded his hands on the table. "We went somewhere else today. The Benedettis." He paused. "They're with us." Johnny's expression didn't break. "That's significant. How did you—" "Isabella," Matteo said simply. Johnny looked at her. She held his gaze and said nothing. "Johnny," Matteo said. His voice was still level, not raised, not theatrical, the particular calm of someone who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. "I need to ask you something directly." "Of course." "When did Lorenzo first approach you?" The silence that followed was approximately 2 seconds long, but 2 seconds in a room this quiet was enormous. "I don't know what you mean," Gianni said. "Yes, you do." Matteo's voice didn't change. "We found the transfer, 11 days ago, from the household system to an external account. The information you sent him, the timeline, the financial map. Carano's name, we built a second version of it, a false version. That's what you sent tonight." Gianni's face went very still. "He went to the Ricci dinner ready to use it," Matteo continued. "He's standing in that room right now holding information that is going to work against him in front of the one family he was counting on." A pause. "Because we already had the Benedettis before he knew we were moving." The silence stretched. Gianni looked at the table. "How long?" Matteo asked. And this time, there was something under the steadiness, not rage, but grief. The genuine, unmanaged kind. "How long, Gianni?" A long moment. 4 years, Gianni said. The number landed in the room like something physical. Isabella felt Matteo absorb it. She watched him take the hit without moving, without flinching, and she thought about the specific cruelty of that number. 4 years. The same amount of time she had spent in a relationship that was a construction. 4 years of loyalty that was performance. "Your father," Gianni began. "Don't," Matteo said, quietly. "Absolutely. Don't use my father." Gianni closed his mouth. "Why?" Matteo asked. Gianni looked up. His face had settled into something that was not quite shame and not quite defiance. Something in between the expression of a man who had been carrying a thing for a long time and had perhaps been waiting on some level for the weight to be lifted. "How was going to take it all apart," Gianni said. "Your direction, the way you were moving the family. He had a vision Lorenzo did that was closer to what your father built, more contained, more what he told you it would be," Matteo said. "Yes." A pause. "I believed him." "You chose to believe him." "Yes." Gianni's voice dropped. "I chose to believe him." The room was quiet. Isabella looked at Matteo at the stillness of a man holding something enormous, and she made a decision without thinking about it. She put her hand on the table, not touching him, but close. Just present. Just visible. He glanced at her hand. Something in his jaw released slightly. "Marco," he said. "Yes. Take him." Gianni stood. He didn't resist. He walked with Marco toward the door, and at the threshold he stopped and looked back at Matteo. "For what it's worth," he said, "I underestimated her." He meant Isabella. "We all did. That was our first mistake." Matteo said nothing. The door closed. 40 minutes later, Lorenzo arrived. She heard the car. She heard Marco's voice at the front, brief and clipped. She heard footsteps, fast, purposeful, the footsteps of someone who had just realized that the ground he was standing on had shifted under him, but hadn't yet accepted what that meant. The door opened. Lorenzo Russo, was, she realized immediately, nothing like his brother in the way she had expected him to be, and everything like him in the way that mattered. Same height, same dark eyes. But where Matteo's stillness was earned, the stillness of a man who had learned to hold himself. Lorenzo's movement was performance. Controlled energy, constantly signaling confidence it needed the room to confirm. He stopped when he saw her. He had expected Matteo alone. Maybe Marco. He had not expected the woman sitting at the table with a laptop and documents arranged in front of her like she had been waiting for him for hours. Which she had. "Isabella," he said. He recovered fast. She gave him that. The pleasant voice clicking back into place within seconds. "I've been wanting to meet you properly." "I know," she said. "Sit down, Lorenzo." He glanced toward the inner hallway, where Matteo appeared from the doorway, and leaned against the frame with his arms crossed, watching his brother, the way a man watches something he has decided about. Lorenzo looked between them. He looked at the documents on the table. He looked at Isabella's face, and she watched the precise moment when he understood. "The dinner," he said. "You weren't meeting us there," Matteo said from the doorway. "You never were." "The Benedettis called you," Lorenzo said, not a question. His jaw tightened. "When?" "This morning," Isabella said. "Before you arrived at the Ricci house. Before you used the information Gianni sent." She paused. "Before you stood in front of Francesco with a financial timeline that was designed to make you look like you had everything under control." Lorenzo's pleasant expression was gone now. What was underneath it was sharper, more real. The face of someone who was genuinely intelligent and genuinely cornered and genuinely aware that those two things combined were no longer enough. "Gianni," he said flatly. "He's gone," Matteo said. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. He looked at his brother, a long, searching look that Isabella stepped back from, because whatever was in that look was between the two of them in a way that she recognized and respected. The specific grief of two people who had once shared something and were now standing on opposite sides of its wreckage. "You were always going to run it into the ground," Lorenzo said. His voice was quieter now. The performance was gone. "Your way, your direction, alone. Always alone." "I was alone because you made yourself unavailable," Matteo said. "I asked you in 3 times in the last 2 years. You declined every time." "Because you didn't actually want a partner," Lorenzo said. "You wanted someone to confirm decisions you'd already made." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" The room held its breath. Isabella stayed absolutely still. This was the conversation that had been building for years. She was not part of it. She was witness to it. "You built a parallel network," Matteo said. "You moved money. You compromised this family, our father's family, to people who do not have our interests at hand. You used a woman who had never done anything to either of us as a piece in a game she didn't know she was playing." He paused. "All of that. And you want to tell me I was the problem?" Lorenzo looked at Isabella. She met his eyes without flinching. "You weren't supposed to figure it out," he said to her. Not unkind, almost curious. "You were supposed to be exactly what I told Adrian you were. Manageable, grateful, focused on the life you were being given." "I know," she said. "That was your miscalculation." "Obviously." He tilted his head. "What was the tell? What did I miss?" She looked at him steadily. "You built the plan around a version of me that stopped existing the night I walked out of that party. Everything you calculated, it was accurate for who I was. It was completely wrong for who I became." He absorbed that. He looked at his brother. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Matteo said, "you sit down, and we end this cleanly. Or we don't end it cleanly." He paused. "I'm giving you the choice because you're still my brother. That is the only reason." Lorenzo stood for a long moment. She watched him calculate the rapid, clear-eyed calculation of a very smart person who has run out of moves and knows it. She watched him weigh the options. She watched him find in the specific arithmetic of the situation that there was only one path that didn't cost him everything he had any remaining care for. He sat down. The conversation lasted 2 hours. She stayed. Matteo didn't ask her to leave, and she didn't offer. She sat at the end of the table, and she listened, and occasionally she said something, and she watched two brothers who had loved each other in the specific, complicated way that brothers do imperfectly, and with decades of accumulated damage, try to find what was left of that after everything that had been done to it. It was not a resolution. She didn't expect one. Those took longer than 2 hours, but it was a beginning of something. A first honest conversation in what had apparently been years of performance and management and parallel plans running underneath declared loyalties. At midnight, Lorenzo left. Marco was with him. Elena had arranged what needed to be arranged, the financial network being unwound, the external contacts being addressed, the information that had moved in the wrong direction being neutralized by the information that had already moved in the right one. The Benedetti position held. Francesco Ricci, informed of what had actually been happening by an ally who called him halfway through the dinner, had sent his regrets to Lorenzo and his support to Matteo within the hour. The carefully constructed architecture of Lorenzo's 18 months of work was dismantled not by force, but by the simple devastating reality that the woman he had never accounted for had already replaced every critical piece while he was looking at the wrong room. When the house was quiet, Isabella was still at the table. Matteo sat down beside her. Not across from her. Beside her. She looked at the document still spread in front of her. She felt suddenly the full weight of the last 2 months. The engagement party, the car ride, the contract, the 12 days to the wedding, the financial maps. Gianni's face, Lorenzo's voice in the car, all of it arriving at once, like something that had been held back and was now allowed to come. She pressed both hands flat on the table. "It's over," she said. "The first part," Matteo said. She looked at him. "What's the second part?" He was looking at her with an expression she had been cataloging for 2 months and could not quite name the one that appeared most often at midnight in quiet rooms after the performance was done and there was no one left to manage. "You could leave," he said. "The exit clause is still real. Everything I offered you clean, no consequences. The situation is resolved. There's no longer a threat that requires you to be here." She looked at him for a long moment. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "No," he said, without hesitation, without calculation, without the half-second pause of a man managing his answer. Just no. She absorbed that. She thought about the car ride home from the Benedettis. The way he had said, "You're not a decoration," like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The kitchen at midnight. The documents. The shoulder-to-shoulder configuration that had become theirs without either of them naming it. She thought about 34 years of being exactly what everyone else needed her to be. She thought about the fact that what she felt sitting next to this man in this room at this table at midnight, after the longest 2 months of her entire life, was the specific terrifying piece of someone who had stopped performing. "The exit clause exists," she said carefully. "That doesn't mean I have to use it." He looked at her. She looked at him, and in the quiet of the house, in the particular silence of something that had just been decided without being announced, Isabella Carter understood that she had not simply survived the worst night of her life. She had used it. She had turned it into something, into someone, into the woman, sitting in this room right now, who had mapped a criminal network, outmaneuvered a man who had 18 months of head start, closed an alliance that changed the balance of power in this city, and was sitting beside a man who looked at her. Really looked at her, like she was the most capable and necessary person he had ever known. The transaction had changed. She had changed it. They both had, and sitting there in the quiet. Neither of them speaking. Both of them looking at the same table full of documents that had changed everything. She understood that what came next was not the end of anything. It was the only real beginning either of them had ever had. The morning after Lorenzo sat down and the house went quiet. Isabella woke up before dawn and lay still for a long time. Not from anxiety, not from the churning, restless energy that had driven her through 2 months of financial maps and midnight conversations, and carefully constructed traps. Something different. Something she had almost forgotten the texture of. Stillness that wasn't performance. She had spent so many years being still on the outside, while everything underneath moved frantically, managing, calculating, adjusting, giving every room exactly what it needed from her. This was different. This was quiet that went all the way down. She got up. She made coffee. She stood at the window and watched Chicago come alive in the early gray light. And she thought about the woman who had stood on the hotel steps 2 months ago, holding a champagne flute she hadn't thrown, watching the city like it belonged to someone else. She didn't recognize that woman anymore. Not because she had disappeared, because she had finally arrived. When Matteo walked into the kitchen at 6:30, she was already on her second cup and had been reading through the Benedetti family's public business portfolio for 40 minutes. He stopped when he saw her. Not surprised exactly, he had learned her rhythms the way she had learned his. But something in his expression, when he looked at her in the early morning light, was softer than the version he showed the rest of the world. "You didn't sleep much," he said. "I slept enough," she said. "There's coffee." He poured himself a cup and sat down across from her, across, not beside, which meant this was a different kind of conversation. She noted it without reacting. "I spoke to Marco this morning," he said. "Early. Lorenzo's financial unwinding is going to take approximately 6 weeks to complete properly. The external contacts, the ones he was cultivating against us, 3 of them, have already reached out to re-establish positions." "Of course they have," she said. "People move toward stability very quickly when the alternative becomes obvious." "2 of them asked specifically about you." She looked up from the portfolio. "About me. About your role, going forward. Whether you'd be involved in the alliance meetings." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "Your name is in circulation in a way it wasn't 8 weeks ago." She absorbed that. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet," he said. "Because I didn't know what you wanted." It landed differently than she expected. Not just the words, the fact that he had waited, that he had not assumed. That in a world where men in his position routinely decided what the women beside them would be, and then informed them of it. Matteo Russo had sat on 3 conversations because he didn't know what she wanted and understood that mattered. "I want to be useful," she said. "Genuinely, not decoratively. I know that." "Then yes," she said. "I'll be at the alliance meetings." He nodded once, and she saw it, the thing that moved across his face briefly before the controlled expression settled back into place. Not relief exactly. Something warmer than that. She looked back at the portfolio. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "Your family's finances," he said carefully. "The Carter Industries connection to Adrian's LLC. We have the full picture now. What do you want to do with it?" She had been waiting for this question. She had been turning it over for 2 weeks, examining it from every angle, the way she had examined every other problem thoroughly, without sentiment, looking at what was actually there, rather than what she wished were there. "My father knew about the payment structure," she said. "Not all of it, not Lorenzo's involvement, but he knew money was moving between Carter Industries and Whitmore's firm in ways that weren't in the official partnership agreements." "He chose not to look closely," Matteo said. "He chose not to look at all," she said, "because looking would have required him to make a decision he didn't want to make." She paused. "He's not a villain. He's a man who took the easier path for years and called it wisdom." "What does he deserve for that? Honesty," she said. "He deserves to hear from me exactly what happened and exactly what it cost. What he does with that is his to decide." She looked at Matteo. "But I'm not protecting him from it, and I'm not managing his reaction." "When?" "Today," she said. "I've been putting it off long enough." She called her father at 8 in the morning and told him to meet her alone. No mother, no lawyers, no one from the company. He arrived at a restaurant near the Carter family office, somewhere he was comfortable on his territory, which she gave him deliberately. She was done needing the advantage of unfamiliar ground. He looked older than she remembered. Not dramatically. Just the particular aging that happens to people when a situation they thought they controlled reveals itself to be something else entirely. He sat down across from her and looked at her face and said, "You look different." "I am different," she said. "The marriage is real," she said. "That's not what I'm here about." She set a single document on the table between them. 3 pages. The relevant portion of the financial timeline edited to show exactly what he needed to see. "I'm here about this." He looked at the pages. She watched him read. She watched the moment when he recognized what he was looking at, the specific tightening around his eyes, the slight adjustment in his posture. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I built it," she said. "Over the last 6 weeks." He looked up. "You've known," she said. Not an accusation, a statement. Not everything, not Lorenzo Russo's involvement, or the depth of what Adrian was doing. But you knew the financial arrangement wasn't clean. You knew there were payments you couldn't fully account for. And you let the engagement continue because the alliance was valuable. Her father was quiet for a moment. "Isabella." "Tell me I'm wrong," she said. He looked at the document. He didn't tell her she was wrong. She breathed through the particular familiar grief of a child, discovering that a parent chose something over them and called it something else. It was not the devastating blow it might have been 6 months ago. She had done her grieving in advance in the incremental way that people do when they have spent years sensing a truth they weren't ready to name. "I thought it would work out," he said finally. "I thought Adrian was—" "You thought he was manageable," she said. "And you thought I was manageable. And you thought the arrangement would hold because you needed it to." She folded her hands on the table. "I understand the logic. I don't forgive it. But I understand it." He flinched at that. "Isabella, I never wanted—" "I know," she said. "That's the part that's hardest to be angry about. You didn't want to hurt me. You just didn't put preventing it very high on the list." She paused. "I need you to bring Carter Industries' financial arrangements into compliance. Fully. The LLC dissolves, that's already in process on the other end. The payments stop. And you have your attorneys conduct a full internal audit, and you share the results with me." He stared at her. "With you," he said slowly. "With me," she said. "Because I know this company as well as you do, and I know this landscape better than anyone who currently works for you. And because if I'm going to rebuild any kind of relationship with my family, it has to be built on something real." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" Her father looked at her for a long moment. The look on his face was complicated. Somewhere inside it was pride, the specific, uncomfortable pride of a parent who has just understood that their child became formidable, in spite of them, not because of them. And somewhere beneath that something more honest, something that looked almost like the beginning of actually seeing her. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She stood up. "Isabella," he said quickly. She stopped. "I am sorry." He said it simply, without polish, without management. It sounded true. "I know," she said, and she meant it, and she walked out. Dana was waiting for her outside. Not by plan, Isabella had texted her 20 minutes ago, a single message, "Talk to Dad." "I need lunch," Dana had responded. "Already in my car." Which was why she was one of the 2 people in Isabella's life she actually trusted completely. They sat at a corner table, and Dana ordered for both of them without asking, because she had been doing it for 15 years and always got it right. And then she looked at Isabella's face and said, "Tell me everything." So she did. Not the version she had been presenting to business associates and family contacts, the controlled, strategically edited version. The real one. Start to finish. The engagement party. The hotel steps. Matteo. The documents. Gianni. Lorenzo. Her father that morning. Dana listened without interrupting, which required visible effort at several points. When Isabella finished, Dana was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I mean, okay as in I understand everything, and I have approximately 400 feelings about it." She reached across the table and grabbed Isabella's hand. "But the main thing is, you're okay. You're actually okay." "I'm actually okay," Isabella confirmed. "And Matteo." Dana stopped. Started again. "When you talk about him, Your voice does something. Isabella looked at her water glass. My voice doesn't do anything. Isabella. Dana. You just described a man who sat next to you instead of across from you and waited to find out what you wanted before deciding anything. And you said it like it was just a fact, and not the most significant sentence in everything you just told me. Isabella was quiet. He treats you like you're capable, Dana said gently. You said that weeks ago, but listening to you now, it's more than that, isn't it? It was not a question. Isabella thought about the kitchen at midnight. The coffee already made. The chair pulled around to her side of the desk. The single text come now that he had responded to in 3 minutes without asking for explanation. The way he had said no when she asked if he wanted her to go quickly and simply, and without the half-second calculation that preceded every other honest thing she had ever asked a man. Yes, she said. It's more than that. Dana squeezed her hand. Good, she said fiercely. You deserve more than that. You deserve all of that. Isabella looked at her oldest friend and felt something she had been running low on for a very long time. Completely simply seen. 3 days later, Adrian Whitmore called. She almost didn't answer. Then she decided that whatever was on the other end of that call was information, and information was always worth having. Isabella. His voice was careful. The careful of someone who has spent several days preparing what he plans to say, and still isn't sure it's enough. Adrian, she said, I need you to know. Stop, she said. Whatever you're about to tell me you need me to know, I already know it. I've known it for 2 months. I've verified it from 14 different angles. A pause. Is there something specific you called to say, or did you just need to feel better? A silence. The LLC is being dissolved, he said. My attorneys contacted me. Whatever he paused. Whatever Russo did. Whatever I did, she said. Correct the sentence. Another silence. Longer. Whatever you did, he said finally. It's gone. The structure is gone. I want you to know I'm not going to. I'm not making any kind of move. There's nothing left to move with. I know that too, she said. Victoria. He stopped. What about her? We're not together anymore. She hasn't been since. He exhaled. Since she understood the full picture. She didn't know all of it, Isabella. I want you to know that. I know that too, she said. I spoke to her. I'm sorry, he said. And unlike her father's apology, which had landed with weight and truth, this one sounded like a man completing an obligation. She recognized the difference immediately. She had spent 4 years not recognizing it, and now it was unmistakable. Adrian, she said, I don't need anything from you. Not the apology and not the explanation. You were a chapter. The chapter is finished. She paused. Don't call again. She ended the call. She set the phone down on the table, and she noticed with something close to wonder that she felt absolutely nothing about it. Not anger, not grief, not the complicated residue of 4 years being dismantled. Just nothing. The particular clean nothing of a thing that is genuinely over. She picked up her phone again and sent Matteo a message. Adrian called. It's done. I'm on my way back. He replied in 30 seconds. I'll have coffee ready. She smiled at her phone for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she got in the car. The Benedetti meeting, the formal one, the full alliance confirmation happened 10 days after Lorenzo sat down. It was not small. Old man Benedetti moved carefully and deliberately, and when he moved, it was with the full weight of his position, which meant the room was filled with people who mattered and paid close attention. Isabella stood beside Matteo, not behind him, not slightly to the side in the way women were positioned when they were meant to be seen but not heard. Beside him, shoulder to shoulder. The configuration that had become theirs in private, now simply visible in public. Benedetti addressed them both when he spoke. His wife Carla caught Isabella's eye from across the room and gave her a single small nod that contained approximately 3 paragraphs of acknowledgement. Francesco Ricci arrived midway through and made a point of speaking to Isabella directly before speaking to Matteo. She answered his questions clearly and specifically, and she watched him recalibrate in real time the particular adjustment of a man who has been told something about a person and is now replacing that information with something more accurate. Elena stood near the back wall and watched all of it with the expression Isabella had learned to read as professional satisfaction. The look of someone who had assessed a situation, revised their position, and was not displeased about being wrong in the direction of better. Marco, for his part, stood near the door and looked at the room with the air of a man who had protected this family for years and was quietly, privately content about how this particular chapter had resolved. At one point during the evening, Matteo leaned slightly toward her and said very low, "The man in the gray jacket has been watching you for 20 minutes. Benedetti's attorney," she said without looking. "He's deciding whether to ask me about Carter Industries directly or wait for a more strategic moment." Matteo was quiet for a second. "How do you know?" "He's looked at his phone twice, but not actually read anything on it. He's creating opportunities to approach without committing to any of them." She finally glanced toward the man. "He'll come over in the next 5 minutes." 4 minutes later, Benedetti's attorney appeared at her elbow. Matteo made a sound beside her that was almost not quite, but almost a laugh. She handled the conversation cleanly and sent the attorney away with exactly the information she wanted him to have, and none of the information she didn't. When he was gone, Matteo said very quietly, "You're terrifying." "Is that a problem?" she asked. "No," he said, with a certainty that had no performance in it at all. "No, it is absolutely not a problem." It was 11 o'clock when they got home. The house was quiet. Elena had left an hour ago. Marco was at his own place for the first time in 2 weeks. The staff had settled the building into its nighttime rhythm, and the particular hush of a large space with no urgency in it had descended over everything. Isabella set her clutch on the hall table. She slipped off her heels. She walked to the kitchen in her bare feet and opened the refrigerator and stood looking at it for a moment, with the pleasant blankness of someone who has been socially excellent for 4 hours and has temporarily run out of thoughts. Matteo appeared in the doorway. "You don't actually want anything from the refrigerator," he said. "No," she agreed. "I'm just standing here." "Come sit down." She closed the refrigerator. She sat at the kitchen table. Their kitchen table, she thought, and the casualness of that possessive landed differently than it once had. He sat across from her. No documents, no laptops, no information to process or decisions to strategize. Just two people at midnight in a quiet house. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "Tell me what this looks like now," she said. "Going forward. The alliance meetings. The Carter Industries situation. Your family and the restructuring." She paused. "Us." "What about us?" he asked. She looked at him directly. This was not a woman who had learned to be brave in the last 2 months. This was a woman who had discovered that she had always been brave. She had just been spending the bravery in the wrong direction. Holding things together that should have fallen apart. Managing situations that deserved honesty. Staying quiet when she should have spoken. "The exit clause," she said. "I want to remove it." Matteo was very still. "Not because I feel like I have to stay," she said. "Because I don't want a door that implies I'm always planning for the alternative." She held his gaze. "I came into this because it was honest. I want to stay in it because it's real. And I want the structure to reflect that." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're sure?" he said. "I've been sure for a while," she said. "I was just being careful." "Careful is not a bad thing." "No," she agreed. "But at some point careful becomes another way of not committing to what you actually want. And I have spent enough of my life not committing to what I actually want." She paused. "Remove the clause." He leaned forward. He rested both forearms on the table. He looked at her with the expression she had been cataloging since the hotel steps, the one that appeared when he had made a decision he wasn't going to take back. "There's something I need to say to you," he said. "Then say it." "I told you at the beginning that this was a business arrangement," he said. "That was true when I said it. It stopped being entirely true approximately 3 weeks in, and I've been aware of that and choosing not to say anything, because I made you a promise about the terms, and I don't break promises." She watched him. "But you just changed the terms," he said. "So I'm saying it." He held her gaze. "I don't know how to do this the way other people do. I don't have a version of this that looks normal or simple or easy. This life." He stopped, started again. "What I'm offering you is not quiet. It's not safe in the way most people mean when they say safe. It will always require things from you that other lives wouldn't." "I know that," she said. "And I know what it costs," he said. "I've watched it cost you things already. Things you shouldn't have had to pay." "I chose this," she said. "I choose it. Keep going." Something shifted in his face. The last layer of management, she thought. The final controlled thing releasing. "I am not the same person I was the night I approached you on those steps," he said. "You did that. You came into this world and you mapped it and you understood it and you changed the shape of it. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, you changed the shape of me." He paused. "I didn't expect that. I want you to know I didn't build this arrangement to get that. But I won't pretend it didn't happen." The kitchen was very quiet. "Mateo," she said. "Yes, I know," she said. "I know you didn't plan it. I didn't plan it either." She looked at him steadily. "That's what makes it real." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not grasping, not urgent, just present. The deliberate, decided weight of a man who had stopped being careful about what he was willing to let her see. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that for a long moment. Two people in a kitchen at midnight, at the end of the most complicated 2 months of both their lives, with the particular quietness of something that had just been said out loud, that had been true for weeks. 6 weeks later, Carter Industries submitted its internal audit to the board. Isabella reviewed the final document before it was filed. Her name was listed as a consulting advisor. Her father called when it was done. He said 3 things. "Thank you, I'm sorry, and I see you now." She believed all 3. She didn't know yet what they would build from that. But she believed them, and that was the beginning of something. Victoria reached out by letter. Handwritten 2 pages. The kind of effort that could not be faked or efficiently produced. She didn't ask for forgiveness in it, which was the right instinct. She told the truth, which was rarer and more valuable. Isabella read it twice and wrote back. 4 paragraphs. Honest. The door, she decided, was not closed, just different. It would take time to understand what shape it could hold now. Lorenzo Russo spent 4 weeks in a different city while the financial dismantling was completed. When he came back to a meeting with Mateo and no one else. Isabella was not present for that conversation, and she didn't ask about it. Some things belonged between brothers, and only brothers, and she understood that completely. What she did see was Mateo's face afterward. Tired. More open than it usually was. The specific openness of someone who has done something genuinely difficult and is still standing. "How was it?" she asked that evening. "Hard," he said. "Yes," she said. He's not gone," he said carefully. "There are conditions. Marco is watching the structure, but he's not gone." He looked at her. "I know that's not simple. Family never is," she said. And she meant it without bitterness, which surprised her a little. She had enough experience with complicated families to know that the ones who cut all the threads cleanly usually regretted it in ways that came due slowly over years. Mateo had chosen the harder path. She thought that was the right one. "You agree with it," he said, reading her face. "I think you chose what you could live with," she said. "That matters more than what's easiest." He looked at her for a moment. "I don't know what I would have done with this," he said, "without you." "You would have handled it," she said. "Alone. The way you always have." "Yes," he said. "But alone is not the same thing as well." She looked at him. She thought about the hotel steps. She thought about the contract on the kitchen table, the pen he produced from his jacket pocket, the 12 days to a wedding that was supposed to be a transaction. She thought about midnight conversations and the chair pulled around to her side of the desk, and the simple word "no" said, without calculation, when she asked if he wanted her to go. "No," she agreed. "It's not." On a Tuesday morning, 3 months after the engagement party that had destroyed her old life. Isabella Carter. Isabella Russo. Though she thought of both names as parts of the same true thing, sat at a desk in a building that was hers, in all the ways that mattered, reading through the agenda for an alliance meeting that 17 people had requested her presence at by name. Not Matteo's wife's presence. Her presence. Isabella's. Her phone buzzed. Matteo Benedetti's people confirmed for Thursday. They asked if you'd be leading the financial portion. She typed back, "Tell them yes." His reply came immediately. Already did. She put the phone down and looked at the agenda and thought about the woman who had stood on the hotel steps and felt relief disguised as devastation. Who had climbed into a stranger's car because the honest unknown felt safer than the managed familiar. Who had spent 2 months mapping a world she had never planned to enter and found somewhere inside it the version of herself she had always been capable of being, but had never been given, had never allowed herself the space to become. She had not found herself by being rescued. She had not found herself by being handed a better life on different terms. She had found herself by walking into the most uncertain situation of her entire existence and discovering that she was exactly the person it required. They had all underestimated her, her family, Adrian, Victoria, Lorenzo, Felix Carano. Every person who had looked at Isabella Carter and seen the woman they needed her to be, rather than the woman she actually was. Every single one of them. And every single one of them had paid for that miscalculation in the currency of their own carefully constructed plans, falling apart, not by force, not by luck, but by the simple devastating consequence of underestimating a woman who had spent 34 years learning to see clearly in environments designed to keep her blind. She opened her laptop. She started on the financial portion for Thursday. She did not think about the hotel steps. She did not think about the champagne flute, or the ring she had set on the car seat, or the dress she had worn to a party that was supposed to celebrate a future that belonged to someone else. She thought about Thursday. She thought about the meeting. She thought about the work in front of her that was genuinely, completely, irrevocably hers. And Isabella Russo, who had once been the woman everyone managed and no one truly saw, sat in the quiet of her own life and did exactly what she had always been capable of doing. She got to work. Not because she had to, not because someone needed her to, but because she wanted to, and for the first time in 34 years, that was the only reason that mattered.